Good evening. So we're going to have our guest introduced in just a moment, but before we do that, I wanted to tell you that last week's lecture will be posted on the website. It's not quite yet ready from the people, so we should expect to get that in the next day or two.
It's not censored?
No, it's not censored, no. So, not by me anyway. So that will be put up, and so that's number one. Number two, welcome, by the way. Thanks. You're welcome. I know we occasionally have guests here, so that's good. This last week, we also had a bit of an exchange among some people about last week's lecture, which is good and healthy, I think. So. If anyone would like to send in any of their thoughts after tonight's presentation and our discussion with Professor Russell, send them on to me and I'll post them as I did last week on the website. Okay? So that continues to grow and we continue to add things to it. It seems like there was something else I was going to say. Oh yes, yeah. Just to remind the undergraduates that at 7:30 on Wednesday night I will be here, and Professor Putz will be here as well, and we'll have our regular discussion group. And I think that's it. It seems like there's something else. Yes, Alex.
Small question on the responses to lectures thing. Would it be possible for you to get in contact with the university to figure out how to open up the coursework forums that this class has?
We do have courseworks for the class, but the only problem is people from continuing studies don't get, right now I can't get them into it unless you know of a way. And I don't think so. I don't think we can do that. So that's why we have to do it this kind of clunky way right now, if that's all right. Okay, it meets with your approval. Okay, very good, very good. Oh yeah, I know what I was going to say, or maybe I already said it. I will be here Wednesday to talk. Okay, good. I'm finished. So I'm going to hand it over to Oliver. All right.
Hi. Welcome everybody. Okay, today I think it's a special presentation, but that is for personal reasons. Today we'll hear from Bob Russell, the founder and director of the Center for Theology and the Natural Sciences, and the Ian G. Barber Professor of Theology and Science at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. Now, Bob is a physicist and a theologian, so he's one of those weird people who has dual degrees and trainings, which means he's fluent in both languages. You will see that makes a huge difference. Aside from that, he is he's an alumnus of this very school, so he enjoys being back, I can tell. It's like walking down memory lane. And over there, and this, it's great. Bob has, I think, with the center, done something that is so far, obviously, it's unmatched. I don't think there's much out there that you can compare to what the center has done in the last 33 years, is it? For over 20 years of those 33 years, the center, together with the Vatican Observatory, did a whole series of conferences that were then published in book forms, meetings, and so forth, on the question of divine action in light of the natural sciences. And of course, that's going to be a part of the talk that Bob will talk about here today. And that work has certainly changed the way that the field of religion and science works today. So from that perspective, I think that having him for that reason alone is a treat. Bob has done, I think, extraordinarily creative work. And that is, I know this sounds awfully arrogant from a young whippersnapper like me, but I say this with the greatest admiration and affection. Here you have somebody who does not talk about quantum mechanics because he has read some popular books. or he talks about Einstein because he's seen the movie. And here's somebody who uses the mathematics, who uses the physics, and really relates it to theology. And does that in I find, a really amazing way. I think a lot of questions that came up in the class so far, you will find addressed in this talk. And I think you will find it addressed in an extraordinarily creative way. So before I'm embarrassing anymore, I'll stop right there and say, welcome Bob's talk here on key issues on the frontier of science and religion. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Oliver, for that gracious introduction, and Paul, too, for inviting me to share these 2 hours with you today. I'll suggest for the first hour we go through the PowerPoint, and if you have questions of clarification, just a definition or a concept, stop me and ask me. Then we'll have conversation in the second hour, see how we do. May not make it through all 5 topics, but we'll see. So behind all of it, I use Ian Barber's fourfold way of relating science and religion, which you've seen already, and I'm working out of the integration model at the bottom. Here are the 5 issues, which I'll let you read for yourself. Okay? I think this will be available on your website, so you don't need to take a lot of notes. Okay. So a Big Bang quote discovered. That's a story in itself because it wasn't an overnight discovery, 10 years of work, but that's okay. It comes out of, Big Bang cosmology comes out of Einstein's general theory of relativity. And you already see the influence of philosophy of science on theory construction because Einstein adopted Newton's principle of relativity, all motion is relative, made it into special relativity, speed of light's constant, and made it into general relativity. What's really unique here is it's the first time in history we have a cosmology in which space-time participates in the evolution of the universe. Unlike Aristotle, where space-time is a container, same for Newton, and things happen inside it. Here, mass is on the surface of space-time, three-dimensional surface, and the surface is dynamic. So you have the curvature of space-time determined by the distribution of matter and vice versa. These equations are really phenomenal philosophically as a concept of nature, as well as a profound scientific theory. Here's a homey way of looking at that. Matter tells space how to curve, space tells matter how to move. I'm sure you've seen that before. And that saying comes from Misner, Thorne, and Wheeler, Gravitation, 1968, I think. There are 3 models of the universe in the simplest form, the sort of so-called standard Big Bang models, the ones we always talk about. We'll come back to this later and talk about inflation, but for right now, we're going to just look at standard Big Bang models. So 2 are open, which means they are infinite in size from the beginning. They expand forever. So infinite in size, expanding forever. 1 is closed, finite in size, expands to a maximum size, recollapses. Exactly. Okay. And most likely we live in the open model that's slightly saddle-shaped, and it's accelerating. Perlmutter and others from UC Berkeley got the Nobel Prize for discovering that the expansion rate itself is increasing in time. Okay. Now, I'm going to move to interpreting this model in the theological community. There are really 3 ways of interpreting it. All 3 models can come into these 3 ways because they all have a beginning of the universe. All 3 of the models we saw come from a t = 0 or Big Bang singularity. And that's what gives rise to these 3 interpretations. John Wheeler called it the greatest paradox on the books of physics, that the universe would have a singularity. We'll come back to that again. So 3 responses. The first one is t = 0 is directly relevant to theology. But even here, there are 2 very different views of directly relevant. There's the view supported by Pope Pius XII, that in fact t = 0 offers a kind of support for belief in the Creator. Right? And there's a view of Fred Hoyle, who was a committed atheist and a key cosmologist of the 20th century, that it was challenging that there's a t = 0 to the universe, but as an atheist, he couldn't accept it, and so he actually put together a competing model, the steady-state model. So just to recap, the folks in this slide stand for a lot of folks who say, if the universe had a beginning, that's important. We need to think about that philosophically, theologically. And they split into those who say, good news, right? Hooray for t equals 0. And bad news, let's get rid of it. Okay. Now, let me just say there's a group called Reasons to Believe, still very popular. I think they've got 10,000 members. You can Google them. And most of their work is trying to argue that the standard Big Bang model coming out of the 60s is right because it gives you a basis for belief in God. I've been in debates with them saying, look, the truth is standard Big Bang has been replaced by inflation 35 years ago, so you can't really appeal to it because it's already been modified. But they're insistent. So Hugh Ross, Reasons to Believe. Let me say something about Fred Hoyle. Hoyle is one of my heroes because he does something which very few people do and which I always advocate doing, and that is if you can do it. If you really have firmly held theological beliefs about the world, right, it may send you in a liberation environment to march for the poor and oppressed, right, to change society. It might send you into a spiritual area to try to gain more understanding of yourself as a spiritual person. But if you're a scientist, and if your beliefs conflict with science, if you're really good at science and really clear about your beliefs, you might be the 1 in 1,000 who is actually able to construct an alternative scientific theory, which is scientific. Okay, so Fred Hoyle, committed atheist, angry as hell at t equals 0, goes about producing a model of the universe in which there is no t equals 0, steady state model. And it lasts for something like 2 decades until background radiation was discovered in the 60s. And 3 or 4 different reasons came on board supporting Big Bang and not supporting Hoyle. Just as a point of fact, there still is a research group led by people like the Russian scientist Narlikar, who still pursue universes with no beginning for the same sort of reason. Okay. Now, let me just make Hoyle's case even stronger from a kind of scientific, philosophical point of view. His argument was not just, well, I'm an atheist, I don't want t equals 0 because the Christians win. His argument was really t equals 0 is irrational from a scientific point of view. After all, science can be seen, right, as based on the commitment to explain natural effects through natural causes. Right? That your project is to say, here's the situation in the world, I'm going to explain it by a previous situation. Well, what about t equals 0? It's clearly an event, right, the beginning of the universe, so it's a natural state, but by definition, it isn't the effect of a previous cause. So is it scientific or not? Well, yes and no. It can't be yes and no, so Hoyle called it irrational, a kind of insult to cosmology that the majority of his colleagues would believe in the model of the universe, which he helped work on, which in fact led to this irrational claim about the beginning. So he had a logical argument or a philosophical argument against Big Bang as well as a theological argument against Big Bang. And he was a brilliant enough scientist to put together this model. And I'll just say one more thing about it. He didn't use Einstein's general theory of relativity because general relativity gives you models for the beginning. He actually had to reinvent a different theory of gravity, similar but different, and use that theory of gravity to make this prediction. So it'd be great to see more scientists whose convictions were that clear and who were gifted enough to actually produce alternative, right, or competing models in science. Okay. Now you may want to ask me, was that a statement in favor of ID? No. But you may want to ask afterwards why it is or isn't, unless it's so obvious that you don't need to ask, which I hope it is. The other end of the spectrum is t equals 0 is completely irrelevant to theology. We don't care about it, we don't discuss it, we acknowledge it, but it's just not a big deal theologically. Now, that may not be surprising if you're into liberation theology or a Marxist theory of economics in the church's misuse of its funds or something. I mean, not everybody cares, but notice 2 people who go on record as saying it's irrelevant are 2 of the leading scholars in theology and science, John Polkinghorne and Arthur Peacock. So why would they say if they're professional people in theology and science, why would they say that John Wheeler's greatest paradox in the books of physics doesn't count, isn't important? Well, because they didn't want us to get distracted from the main lesson of cosmology. Again, think Aristotle. Finite universe, eternal, static, nothing ever changes. Think Newton. Infinite universe, static, nothing ever changes. These are container theories of the universe. And they're universes which are not like they're creatures. Creatures that come and go. We're born and die, right? We have histories, we have life. Things happen that are repeatable. I can't go back to Stanford in 1968 and relive those glorious days. It's gone. You're having yours, but thank goodness I had mine. But what's interesting with this model of the universe, first time in history, the universe is a historic happening. It's got a history. There was a t equals 0, we'll never get it again. There were early galaxies without stars, with stars without planets. They, when supernova, produced the materials out of which planets and new stars formed, like our sun and our planets. Right? So the flesh we're made of comes from a supernova. And there'll be a time, maybe 1,000 billion years from now, where stars will have burned out, gone black hole. All will be a kind of plasma of elementary particles expanding forever. So that's a universe that's more like life than like an inanimate sort of there box thing. And so these folks want to emphasize this as the radical characteristic of Big Bang and not just its beginning. Okay? So it's an open and dynamic universe in which life is possible. And we're going to go to that second piece in a second with the fine-tuning argument. This is a universe in which life can happen. So it's special for that way too. We're going to get to that in a second. Now, the third view, those of us sort of middle of the road, is it's indirectly relevant. Science provides a kind of confirmation or inference to the best explanation, right? Sort of a good guess that, yeah, it would probably be God who would create a universe like this, but it's not proof. I oftentimes use the example of a character witness in a court of law. Let's say Oliver is accused of a crime. No one was there. There's no eyewitnesses. But I really do know Oliver well, and I know he couldn't have done it. It's just not possible for him to have done it. I can be called as a character witness, right? It's not direct witness. It's not proof. But it can be a very important piece of evidence in his favor. And this is sort of what these folks say. Ernest McMullen was the clearest. If you believe in creation, you would expect to see a universe something like this. A universe that's historic and has a beginning. So the difference between life and non-life isn't that cataclysmic. There's more continuity than discontinuity. Okay. I'm going to move a little faster here. So Big Bang, the second point, and the anthropic principle. Now, when I was at Stanford taking physics courses, you know, back before the dinosaurs, way back. I can barely remember. I mean, the kind of unspoken assumption that was so just prevalent that if you didn't get it, you probably wouldn't have been a physics major because it was just in the air, was that physics is the clue to reality. Physics tells you what's real. What's real is matter in motion. The universe is a big rock. I mean, it's beautiful, gorgeous, and everything, but it's just the universe. And life, well, I mean, we all love it because we're alive, but it's not really special. It isn't somehow built into physics. I mean, physics is just what it is. Could have been different, but so what? And I guess if life is possible on some, you know, some primordial soup someplace, fine. But the sort of unspoken assumption was that life has almost no significance to nature compared to what physics and cosmology is. Okay? And again, like I say, we didn't talk about it. It was just there, like the Vietnam War. It was just everywhere, but we do physics. I mean, it's one of those things where it's an environment you're in. Okay. Now, what's really shocking is that in that environment, a question was raised which none of us raised. I mean, I don't mean just students, but none of the faculty thought about it. 20 years later, in the mid-'80s, people began to notice something really curious. That, you know, we all had to learn the speed of light, Planck's constant. I can still sort of trot them out for you, but I don't really see any relevance in those numbers. I mean, why does it take light 2/3 of a second to get to the moon? It could have been 1/10 of a second. I mean, it's just what it is. Turns out it isn't just what it is. I mean, that's what's really shocking. The values of the fundamental constants of nature, the speed of light, Planck's constant, the charge to mass ratio of an electron, and so on, these fundamental constants of nature happen to be very particular. If they were different by 1 part in a million, the universe couldn't have been hospitable to life. It would have expanded too fast to produce stars, or never expanded fast enough to produce heavy elements. I mean, there are books now written for the general audience on the so-called fine-tuning of the universe. Okay? So just before we go to what that means theologically, just let that sink in. This is simply a change, a sea change in physics, right? Before we interpret it, you take a physics course now, you'd get this fine-tuning argument. We didn't even think to ask the question because it was assumed that physics was so much just the floor you walk on, that it couldn't have had any significance in something like, well, why is the speed of light the way it is exactly? Well, it's got to be something, and that's it. But it turns out that the combination of the 5 fundamental constants of nature, again, have to be what they are to within 1 part per million, or you get a universe in which life couldn't have evolved. Okay, so there's now an intimate connection between life as a phenomena and the physics of the world in which it's a phenomena, right? I'm not reducing life to physics. I'm saying there's a fundamental scientific connection between the two. And the question is, why is that the way it is? Okay. Now, the responses are all over the place, but they divide into 2 kind of obvious ones. First, you see I have 2 of the constants, C1 and C2, right, on the 2 axes, with little dashed lines suggesting the width of variations which are consistent with life. So they meet in a little box, a little square. And again, there are 5 constants. That'd be a hypercube. And it's a hypercube whose size are 1 part per million. Right? So it's tiny, to say the least. So why does the actual universe sit right where that hypercube sits? Why is the actualized universe the one in which its fine-tuning constants are in that box? So one answer is, well, God did it. I mean, God created the universe. God's a clever sort of creator. God creates the universe such that God's purpose of creating the universe, that is to produce life, to come into communion with God, could happen by natural means. Not by miracle, but by natural means. And you'll see me endorsing theistic evolution later on against other views, atheistic and ID, because God, in my view, chooses to create life through the very process of nature, the nature which God has chosen to create. That's a biological statement. Now I'm making a physical statement. God chose to create the universe such that it would be capable of biology. So there's a theological statement about the scientific relation or nearness between biology and physics. It has theological significance. Okay, so God did it ex nihilo. Of course, the alternative is to say, well, each of these values of the fundamental constants, right, C1 and C2, characterizes an actual universe. Right? The entire space of the diagram is filled with actual universes. In fact, since these are continuous variables, as you know, that means they're dense, which means they are uncountably infinite in points. That is, there would be an uncountable infinity of actual universes. And this is many worlds assumption. It's called many worlds just as a kind of throwaway term. Okay? So just to repeat, the other response is all possible universes exist. If that's the case, of course we're in the one we're in. Remember Rosanna, Rosanna, Dana? Is this the party to whom I'm speaking? Right? We're in the universe we're in because that's the one we could be in. There's no paradox to be solved by God. God is totally irrelevant. We're simply in the one we're in. Now, let's just stop for a second and think about what kind of claim that is. The one on the left is clearly a theological claim. As a Christian, I would make that claim. I would say God graced us by creating a universe in which we could have evolved. And God communicates God's self to us to be in community with God through God's grace. The ones on the right say, oh, it's very simple. All possible universes exist. Now, that's a fine claim. I mean, there's nothing superficial about it. It's a very profound claim. But it's not a scientific claim. In fact, it's pretty much as metaphysical claim as mine is. Because what you're saying is you have to postulate the existence of an uncountable infinity of different universes. None of them are directly observable because they're different universes. It's not like a different planetary system, like Alpha Centauri is to our system. It's not a different galaxy, like the Virgo cluster. It's a different universe, and there are an uncountable infinity of them. And you postulate their real existence to explain our existence. Well, that's possible. I mean, you can't rule it out of bounds, but you'd have to say to yourself, which one is more likely, or follow Occam's razor, which one is the simplest explanation? Because the simplest ones are typically the best ones. Remember, Einstein always said about general relativity. His was the simplest theory of gravity, which embraced special relativity. So a lot of debate has gone on as to whether or not the argument on the right is a species of science or a species of metaphysics. And I think it's a metaphysical argument. But I will say this, over the last 3 decades or so since it was produced originally, there have been increasingly good scientific arguments that are indirectly supportive of it. The best one now is string theory, or superstring theory, with its mega universe. You have 10 to the 500 universes in it. That's still finite, but it's pretty big. And it's indirectly scientific because if it's true that string theory is the best way to combine general relativity and quantum mechanics, and arguably it is, and we know those theories are true, then it has a kind of indirect claim to truth, right? And if string theory produces this multiverse as its mathematical solution to the equations, then it's relatively empirical. It's not empirical like general relativity, but it's not purely metaphysical like Neo-Thomism. He's a Neo-Thomist, a good guy, good kind. He's the Rahner kind. So I think it's an interesting claim to see just what kind of creatures here are arguing with each other, right? And then try to decide, well, which one do you think is a more compelling case? Okay. Note that the way I'm treating this is not a design argument for God. I'm not arguing from nature to God. I'm really trying to import nature, our understanding of nature, into my theology. I'm saying if I believe that God is the creator of the universe, I believe God creates the universe, gives it natural efficacy. We call it secondary causes, described by the laws of science. And those causes are sufficient to bring about life and community in relation to God. So it's theology incorporating science. It's not saying, well, I can prove to you God, look at the fine-tuning arguments. Most folks who do fine-tuning mean it as a design argument. I'm trying not to mean it that way. Not that you can't do it. Most folks do it, but I prefer this one. And I have good company. Freeman Dyson, Paul Davies, both are sort of nominally in the theological community. They both will argue against the Weinberg and Dawkins and Minot and say, look, you argue from science that the universe is purposeless, right? Disteleological. It does not have a teleology, a purpose, an overall meaning, okay, because of chance. For Minot, it's because of chance. Weinberg had that wonderful phrase, the more the universe is comprehensible, the more it's pointless. Remember his first 3 minutes? The more it's comprehensible, the more it's pointless. And the second phrase, physics is the only field which raises life from farce to tragedy, from farce to tragedy. Physics is the only field that raises life from farce to tragedy. So he's getting that from his physics, right? So he's getting this notion of sort of cosmic meaninglessness from physics. Dyson and Davies both argue that the universe is so intimate a blend of physics and biology. And biology, when it's sentient, experiences meaning, right? I know my puppy dog loves me in some ways. There's some kind of meaning there, right? That you're on a continuum from the surely physical, right, some plasma radiation, to the fully alive. If there's more of a continuum than a totally separate worlds, then in fact this meaninglessness of Dyson or Weinberg is sort of undercut. Quick story, Charlie Towns, who won the Nobel Prize for his discovery of the laser, and he was very much involved with Stanford and UC Berkeley. A really good friend, we go to the same church together, we have communion together on Sundays. Charlie tells me the story of talking to Steve Weinberg at a meeting once when Weinberg was going on about the meaninglessness of the universe. And Charlie, in his inimicable way, said, well, Steve, why do you do science? And Weinberg said, well, I like it. And Steve said, and Charlie said, well, do you get a sense of purpose in doing it? And Weinberg said, yeah, it gives me purpose and meaning. And then Charlie said, well, Steve, are you a part of the universe? And Weinberg walked away. So that's a Charlie Towns. He's an amazing guy. So in any case. And then just to reach ahead, quantum mechanics, part of the whole picture, helps make biological evolution possible because you need quantum mechanics to get genetic mutations, and mutations drive evolution as a source of variation, not the only one, but a certain key one. And so quantum mechanics plays a role in the possibility of biological life. Let's move on. So creation and evolution, the third area. So far, physics and a cosmology with fine-tuning make the biological evolution of life in the universe possible. So next, neo-Darwinian biological evolution. Now, this is where I should have Oliver lecture because he's got his PhD in biology, right? I took high school biology, so you're going to see my naivete. Here's a picture of Grumpy Charlie. I think he knew I was going to give a talk on his stuff and he wasn't too pleased. Okay, just some of the key concepts in evolution, but seriously, Oliver will be talking about this a lot in class, so I'm just going to name them. And a nice picture. Again, when I was at Stanford, there really was a tree of life, and we really were at the pinnacle. We all knew it seemed kind of odd, but that's how you organize the taxonomic structures of nature. Now it's organized in a much better way. That's consistent with the number of genes, genetic mutations between species. So this is a map, morphologically and genetically, of the structure of the diversity of species. And notice we're over there on the right with the animals, just between the slime molds and the fungi. I always like that. I tell my daughters that, and they say, Dad, I don't like that. But they're 35 now. Okay, real fast. Responses to evolution. Are they in conflict, evolution and creation? So Dawkins says, yeah. In his famous way of talking, he'll say that evolution gives him a powerful reason to be an atheist. And my response is that you shouldn't extend a scientific theory of any kind to a universalizing and totalizing and normative metaphysics or worldview. Science counts as part of my worldview. I spent a long time getting a PhD in it. But it's not my worldview. Right? It doesn't talk about Mozart or the Vietnam War or my love for my wife or anything else. So you have to have a worldview that's bigger than anything physics can give you, but physics has got to be part of it. Okay? And so when Dawkins or others start from their excellent work in science and generalize, we call it the error of misplaced generalization or expertise. When they generalize their expertise to fields they're not really in and make a universal ideology or metaphysics out of it, it's typically called scientism. And you hear the word nothing but, right? So life is nothing but matter and motion. So you want to be aware of scientism. You might agree with them. I mean, if you're an atheist, you would agree. But simply know what you're doing. You're taking a science and making a worldview out of it. What I'm trying to do is take a worldview, which I inherit as a Christian, and bring science into it. Okay? So it's sort of that other way to relate the two. Scientific creation. wonderful one from St. Augustine. The Bible doesn't tell how the heavens go. The Bible tells how to go to heaven. Right? It's not a science manual. Now, the better way of saying it is the Genesis 1 account, the priestly account, was written after the Hebrews returned from exile in Babylon. And they'd been exposed for 2 generations to the cosmology of the Babylonian world, right? And they took it to be true. I mean, why would they not? They didn't have a cosmology. Babylon had an amazing one. So when they come back and do second temple and get things going again, the astonishment is that they're able to re-understand and re-articulate their faith in Yahweh in terms of the cosmology they're in. And that gives you the 6-day account. The 6-day account is doing science and religion right in their century. They're expressing their faith in God through the way they think the world is structured. God did that. Okay? So it's up to us to actually be creationists is to actually do the same thing now with Big Bang and evolution that they did then. Right? Rediscover Christian faith or Jewish faith or whatever it is, I'm speaking as a Christian, in light of contemporary science. Intelligent design, I'm just going to say it's not an option for lots of reasons, but the most important one is that science is based on methodological naturalism. You explain natural effects by natural causes. You don't bring God into it, then masquerade it as an intelligent designer so you can force feed it to kids in high school in a public education class. That's just not playing fair. Creation, evolution, independence. Stephen Jay Gould is an amazing scientist. I love his work. He had this idea called NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria. In other words, keep them separate, folks. You won't get into arguments. Now, there's a profound philosophical argument for that, which comes from Immanuel Kant, of course. Now, I don't know how much Gould knew of that, but his view of NOMA is sort of an introduction to Kant. The point is, that's why we have this field of theology and science, because we know you can keep them separate. It doesn't really work very well. A lot of issues like stem cell research have biological, ethical, and theological pieces to them. It's so hard to separate out. But the main point is, I simply don't follow him in saying that that's the way it should be. It's okay. I mean, you can do that. But why not relate them? And I think the best way to relate them is to this kind of umbrella term, theistic evolution. Evolution is how God creates the diversity of living species. So God acts through natural causes. Now here you have a view which is informed and supported by dozens of people. I mean, it isn't just the single voice of ID, the single voice of atheistic evolution, the single voice of Gould. You've got Pope John Paul II was a supporter, Ian Barber, Teilhard de Chardin, whole list of people. Oliver puts us on this list? Yes. The last shall be first. So here are 2 classic cases for it. Look how nicely Arthur Peacock put this. Back in 1979, this was his Bampton Lectures in London. Okay, 1979. God acts through chance and law. He called that continuous creation. And God created the universe ex nihilo to have exactly this combination of chance and law that makes continuous creation possible. So the 2 views of creation, that the fact that God gives existence to the universe, whether it's finite or infinite, whether it's static or dynamic, whether it had a beginning or not, the sheer fact of its existence is creation ex nihilo. And the fact that it is a dynamic historical phenomena is creation, continuous creation. And those 2 together reinforce each other, right? So God creates through chance and law, continuous creation, and God created the universe ex nihilo to have this combination of chance and law that makes continuous creation possible. Let's switch to perhaps the most important Catholic theologian, 20th century, certainly my first choice, Karl Rahner, and Oliver is a true expert on Rahner. I always learn from him amazing amounts about Rahner, so be sure and ask him about Karl Rahner. Humanity, matter and the spirit through active self-transcendence, Christ, the final and normative manifestation and the beginning of the divinization of the world. Incarnation positively fits into an evolutionary worldview. So that's just a tantalizer for you to pursue that further. Now, we'll go into a little more depth here because as Oliver indicated, We spent a lot of time in the Cetinus Vatican collaboration on lots of topics. It wasn't just divine action. There were 8 of us on that topic, and there were 50 altogether, 100 essays in books. So it's a broad collaboration. But the question is, granted that God acts through law and chance, is this more than what I used to call statistical deism? That is, just laws that we don't know about. So does chance and law really just equal unknown deterministic law and known deterministic law? Is chance really real? So you and I go to Las Vegas, we play, we win money. It's by chance in a certain sense, but we know that if we know all the exact factors and how we played the game, we could have predicted what happened on the roulette wheel, right? There's no fundamental uncertainty in the roulette wheel, right? You get in a car accident, you thank God you didn't get hurt, and you don't know how it happened, but you know if you knew everything about it, you probably could have figured out all those little causal factors that went together and determined that there'd be a car accident, right? So how do we really resist believing that we're in a deterministic, causally closed, lockstep Newtonian universe? How do we resist that? And if we can't resist it, then divine action, God's action in the world, an action that makes a difference, would be, quote, interventionist. To act, God would break, violate, or suspend the laws of nature. And it's poor theology because these laws actually reflect what God's doing all the time. So you have a God against God, which is not what you want. And it's poor science because every time you make a prediction and it doesn't happen, you don't know whether it's because you had the wrong theory or because God somehow acted to change things around and you didn't know that. So an interventionist strategy is not a good strategy in a theology and science conversation. Okay, then can we find a good non-interventionist strategy? Let me just say, before I say yes, this problem actually produces what's called a forced option between conservatives and liberals on both sides of the Protestant Catholic scale. It's not a Protestant Catholic divide, it's a liberal versus conservative divide over this idea of intervention. If you live in a world that's deterministic and you believe God actually answers prayer, God saved you from a car accident, right? God was involved in the political process. Wherever you think God's making a difference, if you have to conceive of it as interventionist, then the church has 2 options for you. Accept it and accept intervention, and so much the worse for your discussion with science, because those contradict science. Oh, so you reject science, right? Or at least you don't talk about it. Or the liberal response, which is to say, you know, I have to be a non-interventionist because I don't really believe God should contradict the laws of nature or, you know, fool science. So I'll just treat divine action as a kind of subjective interpretation, sort of my way of thinking. So I took my family to see an eclipse cruise, to see an eclipse on a cruise in '79, and it's breathtaking. It's stunning. I mean, you know, I have to admit, there actually was one couple who insisted on having lunch in the dining room during the eclipse cruise because they'd paid for it. So you never can understand people. But the rest of us were on the decks, you know, crying and screaming and look at this thing. It's astonishing. Nobody thought it was a miracle. You know, it was predicted. We knew, that's why we were there on the deck. That's why we paid money to get there. That's why the deck was where it was in the ocean, because we knew we'd see the eclipse, because you could predict it. It's an entirely natural phenomenon, but it looks really amazing. So you could say, I mean, my mom said to me, that was miraculous. Well, I knew what she meant. You know, like you hear a great rendition of Mozart, it's kind of astonishing, miraculous, but it's not really a miracle. I mean, the guy wrote it. He might be a miracle, but in any case. So the liberal view is, it's just a subjective interpretation of an ordinary event. The conservative view is, yes, it's a miracle, and to act with science. Now that split is forced because of a deterministic account of science. And I'm going to map that out for us in the following sense. Here's a little roadmap to options about divine action. So if you have a theory of divine action that presupposes a deterministic world, right, lockstep, causally closed, Newtonian mechanistic world, you have 2 choices for divine action. Subjective, the eclipse. It's really beautiful, but it's not actually anything that breaks the laws of nature. In fact, it depends upon them. or objective. It really does break the laws of nature. And if science says it can't happen, then I'll accept the challenge. And that's the non-interventionist or interventionist accounts we're talking about. And that's liberal and conservative. Now, what I want you to note is that when you see debates over science in the church and you hear liberal versus conservative voices taking different sides in the debate, this is not the typical debate in the church over, say, how many sacraments are there, right? Or gay marriage or something. This is the debate caused by a philosophical interpretation of a scientific worldview, right? It's not a debate inside the sacred halls of the church over which minister to ordain or something. It's a debate that comes to us from outside. This is a very unusual situation. It'd be as if we're all sitting here playing tennis, and then some voice booms out, stop and play soccer. And then we all, okay, and we stop and play soccer. And no one says, well, who is that voice and why does it have authority? So when you see splits over science and evolution and creation and those things in the church, it's oftentimes not caused by the people involved in the conversation. It can be caused by this a priori metaphysical assumption that the world is closed to God. It's deterministic. And therefore, either miracles happen, so much the worse for science, or they don't happen, and then you kind of give up the whole faith tradition. An indeterministic world where chance really happens, where things happen without a sufficient natural cause, where chance of the real fundamental ontological kind is true. That is, there are some events for which there is no sufficient natural cause. If that really is true, and that's the question, then you still have objective and subjective interpretations of divine action, but the subjective one is still non-interventionist, but now you've got a non-interventionist objective one, and that's called NIOTA. That's what I'm after. Non-interventionist objective divine action. God really makes a difference in nature, but God does so without intervening in nature. Or say it slightly the same, God non-miraculously causes differences in nature. Doesn't mean I'm not saying there aren't miracles. I happen to think there are. But this is before that. This is more than just God holds the universe in existence. This is a God who really participates in the world, right? Suffers with nature, responds to prayer, is really active, but achieves that without intervening in nature. That is, without breaking the natural sequence of affairs. You can get that view if you have an indeterministic view of nature. And you can get that if you can find a science which you can base it on. So here's the catalog of views that people explored in our series on divine action. So Thomistic philosophy was one possibility. I don't think it's panned out, but it's been approached and investigated. Process philosophy, Ian Barber, for example. God provides the subjective lure to each event. Whole part causality. God doesn't act in nature, so there's no violation of nature. God acts on the universe as a whole, kind of its boundary, right? So if you make ice cubes, the structure of the ice cube doesn't violate the physics of the water. It imposes boundary conditions on the water as it freezes, right? So you affect the ice, it's got a cubic structure, but not because you've changed its laws, because you put boundary conditions on it. If you can find a way to think about putting boundary conditions on the universe, you could have the universe happen in a certain way. That would be God's intent or action without getting involved in the processes. And Arthur simply didn't want to get down into the processes. He thought it was just a bad way to look at things. Probably the most promising so far is top-down causality in the mind-brain problem. This is a huge topic. I wish I had an hour to talk to you about it. But in the mind-brain problem, in essence, is set up by the following observation. You need a brain to have a mind, but the mind can't be reduced to the brain, right? Without a brain, I can't wave my hand, but I can wave my hand because of my mind. My mind waves my hand, but I have a mind because of a brain. That's why you go to sleep. Hit me in the head, I feel pain, right? I mean, that's that whole subtle interaction between mental states, which we take as primary, right, and their instantiation in the brain. So in the mind-brain problem, if there is top-down causality, if I choose to wave my arm and it waves, if I have libertarian free will, then that might be a model for God's action in the world. And that's what people like Nancy Murphy and Phil Clayton have pursued. John Polkinghorne is famous for pursuing what I call lateral amplification, the butterfly effect in chaos theory. So if God makes a tiny difference here, it can amplify to make a huge difference over here because of the way chaos theory works. So it bifurcates trajectories and does cool things. And then quantum mechanics, that God acts at the quantum level, and sometimes those effects, the effects of God's action just produces the world. So you have the hardness of wood, not because it has hardness, but because of the Pauli exclusion principle, that the wood can't collapse down into its elements. It's atoms. Nancy, Tom, George, and me have pursued that quite a bit. Okay. I'm going to go, because it's almost 8, you've been very patient, I'm going to go through this and not talk more about that. We can talk about it during Q&A. But that's, I think, I think it's a promising approach to non-interventionist objective divine action. But again, the goal is to talk about that kind of divine action, reserving the category of miracles when you really need it, like the resurrection, and reserving the possibility that there are some sciences which might actually allow you to talk about it. And I think quantum mechanics is one of them. Okay. So here I'm listing challenges and advantages to it. And as you can see, we're just not going to have time to do it. But it leads to this question. If God's really working in nature, in evolution, does that expand the problem of theodicy? How can a good and powerful God allow real evil to exist? And that takes us immediately to the fourth question, suffering in nature, or what's called natural evil. So biology, natural evil includes suffering, disease, death, extinctions, right? And what's critical is that those are constitutive of life. Physics, asteroid impact, tsunamis, earthquakes, floods help make life possible. Two explanations for that, for natural evil. The sort of traditional biblical historical explanation, the fall account. First, all that is, all that exists, is created by God, and it's good. God doesn't create bad stuff. Well, there is bad stuff. So what's that about? Well, the fall. The fall produces suffering and death for humankind as a consequence, and it leads to suffering and death in nature too. Right? So if you read the account carefully, the effects of the fall spread out through the world, and animals become predators, and there's suffering and death, and we're at war with the serpent and all that stuff. Now, obviously, I don't read it literally, but I mean, that's the story. That's the story that sort of enshrines Western civilization until the Enlightenment, bless you. So the real challenge is not the Reformation, right? That's kind of minor. The real challenge is the Enlightenment, when this whole story seems to fall apart. And the Enlightenment is both philosophy and the rise of modern science. So those two pieces that rise up in the 17th and 18th centuries give the lie to the story. And we get an evolutionary account, right? Natural evil are not a consequence of an historical event, which itself was a consequence of free will gone wrong. Natural evil are constitutive of life. They're part of the way life happens. They're part of the way species diversify, right? They're part of the biological processes that vastly preceded us. So they can't be the result of a fall, even if there was one. Okay. Now, however one accounts for this theologically, the issue is really huge. And I don't think there's any simple, satisfactory account for it. You can do a lot with Big Bang versus Fred Hoyle, and you can do a lot with fine-tuning, but this is really deep waters. When we're talking about a view of natural evil, suffering, disease, death, and extinction, that's intrinsic to life, but God is the author of life. The Holy Spirit is the giver of life. You've got a huge problem. And I'm not going to sit here and say, well, I can solve it for you. I can't. I want to point to it. I want to give you some tools to think about it. But any way to sort of account for it would be to rationalize it and to rationalize my participation in this in a way. So there are lots of reasons to be very careful when you come to theodicy, because it can easily be a kind of self-rationalization or an understatement of the problem itself. Okay? Okay. And I think all of us in our lived experience know exactly what I'm talking about. So if God creates the diversity of life on earth through the process of nature, theistic evolution, with the background of creation ex nihilo and continuous creation and fine-tuning, saying, yeah, that's the kind of universe I expect for God to create, such that the universe could create life through evolution. If that's the case, what's God's relation to such suffering in nature? Okay, there are a couple of types of responses. They've been followed by dozens of people in theology and science, and it's a really interesting story. Again, it would take an hour to sort of, follow those leads through. But they're really fascinating, and they're really fascinating and tragic in the way each of them comes to a point and says, not much more I can say. I mean, it really is true for all three monotheisms. The biggest challenge is not science. The biggest challenge is evil, right? And my own sinfulness, right? I do those things I ought not to do. I don't do those things I ought to do. There's no health in me. And there's no health in me, as St. Paul says. That's just a phenomenon. Okay, the first response is the cross. If Christians have to choose between the kind of theology of glory, which you see in Romans, that the universe proclaims the glory of God, right, or the Psalms, the universe is the work of God in all its beauty, and a theology of the powerlessness of the cross, that God's true power is revealed by being concealed through the cross. So what appears to be the ultimate tragedy for his followers, that Jesus, this young guy, who was an astonishing miracle healer and everything else, is executed in a horrible way on the cross, that actually is God's most powerful kind of act. Right? If that's the case, then you can extend that. God doesn't just suffer for us, but God suffers for all of life. Right? So the cross is a mystery of mysteries. I mean, how you think of God's power revealed in the cross is itself a huge issue. If you know Jürgen Moltmann's work, after he got out of prison, he wrote The Crucified God. And we teach that all are doctrinal sins. It changes the view of God's power. The trick that people in theology and science have done is to say, okay, I will extend that approach to the problem of natural evil. Okay, God suffers with nature. Now, there's a huge difference. Suffering in nature, right, the predator-prey cycle, is not due to moral conscience. The suffering I cause is due to my conscience, my brokenness. But when a lion eats a lamb, it's not being sinful. So it's not a good match. You can't just take the theology of suffering on the cross and say, okay, copy and paste all over the place. You have to carefully reformulate it. But that's one direction people go in, right? To say the centerpiece of the Christian faith is the cross of Christ, not Romans 1, the glory of creation. That's secondary. The other one is, and very closely related, of course, is redemption theology, that God transforms the world. God doesn't just suffer with nature, but God is in the process of bringing on the new creation. God is transforming the world. That there will be a time in which life is forever, and there's no more crying. Right? There'll be a new Jerusalem, a new heavens, a new earth. So there are three forms of that people pursue. Ian Barber pursued the one he got from Whitehead in process theology, called objective and subjective immortality. God remembers you. And in that memory, you experience yourself forever. And all of your relations in your life is all woven together in God's memory of you. Okay? Now, it's a form of immortality without bodiliness. So it's not resurrection. Resurrection is immortality embodied. This is resurrection without body. So that now depends on your own reading of New Testament and how much you think bodiliness counts for the resurrection. Okay, and Ian was able to go with that. I don't go with that. The other one was Arthur Peacock, who used Dante's Paradise, Paradiso, and in the end of the Paradiso, as you know, in the last stanza, the souls of the blessed, who are saints by then, have this eternal, everlasting vision, direct vision of God. They see God directly. Can you imagine what an incredible experience that'd be? And it's forever. So that's another way of saying what's it all about. Again, the kind of cost is everything about us that's bodily, and there's not a lot of us about us that isn't somehow related to bodiliness, is out of that picture. It's just not there. Right? So it's not clear if you could touch your beloved in that vision, right? Or is it sort of immortal aloneness? And for me, it doesn't capture the majesty of the resurrection of an empty tomb. But it is a profound Christian vision. I mean, of course, it's Dante. Third one is eschatology in light of new creation. Our John Polkinghorne and I have independently thought about this a lot. And maybe I'll just stop here, and we can either go back to something or come back to this or go forward. But you've been patient for an hour, so let's take our 5-minute break. Okay, thanks.